Welcome to philosopherrock.com, a podcast series that explores the philosophies and worldviews of rock and roll. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the presenters, unless otherwise stated. Sometimes your host will say things that do not align with your views or those of the artist reviewed here, and as such, they remain the host's opinions, expressed in good faith for your entertainment, enlightenment and edification. So now, let's join GK and Brian as they attempt to analyse and evaluate the messages in the lyrics and lives of your favourite rockers.
Welcome to the very first episode of Philosopher Rock, where we don't take rock for granted. In this episode, which is the first of a two-parter, we're going to analyse the life, times and music of one of the greatest rock voices of all time, the one and only Ronnie James Dio. Now, we will be offering a critical review here so that we can come to some sort of a conclusion as to what his philosophy on life was. To that end, we will be examining song lyrics, interviews he gave, and other sources that will aid us in our endeavour. We hope you enjoy what we are offering here, and if you do, help us out by sharing it around, especially on your social media lists and other groups that you're in. Thank you. Okay, let's go to episode 1 of philosopherrock.com, Ronnie James Dio, part 1. All right, well, welcome to the very first episode of Philosopher Rock. This is a new project with two hosts. You're going to learn a bit about us in a moment, and we're hoping to entertain and edify you, the listener, with what we're doing here. So I'll just introduce you to my co-host, Brian Day. Brian, good morning. It's morning for you, Brian. Sorry, yes, it's evening for me. Morning, Brian.
Good morning and good evening. Good day, let's just put it that way. Good day.
Right.
Good day.
G'day, mate. Yeah. Okay, so Brian, tell our listeners what we're doing here, what the series is going to be about.
So Garth and I, longtime friends, have found that we usually drift, regardless of what our conversation starts off to be, our conversations drift into talking about music, which we're both big fans of music, both participated in creation of music and over our many years on this planet. So we decided that maybe we should just dovetail our conversations into something that's worthwhile, like a podcast, and we decided that what we would do is we would examine the music and lyrics, mostly in this instance here, for this podcast, the purpose of this podcast, we would examine the lyrics of some of our favorite or some of the ones that we deemed impactful lyricists of rock and roll music, and we want to examine them, look at what they're saying, what their message is, and then kind of examine the message itself as well, and kind of break it down through the channels of worldview and philosophy. And so yeah, we're just kind of taking apart what we've found impactful in rock music and looking at it, and we just passing it on to you listeners at no additional fee.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and it's important to note that we want to offer a critique of some of these artists that we're going to be talking about. Now, often when you hear the word critique, people think, oh, they're going to be critical. Well, in a way we are. We're going to be critically thinking. Now, to be a critical thinker and to offer a critique, you have to look at all the aspects of whoever it is or whatever it is that you're offering a critique on. So we'll be looking at positive and some negative things of the people we're going to be discussing, right? So from our worldview, some of that might be negative, but some of it might be positive, but at least it's going to be a critique from as many angles as we can find, and then, offer it to you for you to make up your own mind. And so to that end, we're not here to assassinate anybody's character or anything like that. Like I say, it's not about that. It's about offering a critique of some of the biggest artists that have been on this planet so far. And, like sort of Brian said, both Brian and I have been in the music world in the past. Brian currently still is. He might talk about that at some stage during our podcast. But, we both really love music. I'm all for not being a passive consumer of media. I think that we should all be active listeners, so therefore participate in what we view, participate in what we listen to, participate in what we read. And by that I mean having a critical mind as to what is going on in whatever the lyrics are, whatever it is that you're viewing or whatever it is you're reading. Try and have an understanding of where the artist, their point of view, where it's coming from, and how it fits with you and what you believe or what you know to be true. So therefore, I say we be active listeners and not passive listeners, active consumers and not passive consumers of media. And really, I'm hoping to, if you're not already in that place in your mind yet, I'm hoping to, through this series, encourage you to do that, to become more active and be a more active consumer of media. So now, for our first episode, we really want to take a look at the life and times of Ronnie James Dio. And one of mine and Brian's favourite artists, I can tell you right now, is one of my favourite rock voices, and I'm sure many of you are listening to this because of his name's put out there, Ronnie James Dio. We've got to hear what these guys are going to say about him. I will let you know this, though, that a lot of this, we're going to assume some prior knowledge of you, dear listener. We're going to assume some prior background knowledge because we're not going to have it all laid out because that would just take too long just to lay out every single thing that there is out there about Ronnie James Dio. But we're going to offer enough to make a critique where towards the end here somewhere we'll make a critique about and offer some sort of view of what Ronnie James Dio's philosophy on life is, as much as we can ascertain from what's out there. So let's kick off. If you wouldn't mind, Brian, tell us just a little bit briefly about who Ronnie James Dio was, because obviously he's died.
Yes. So he was a very prominent singer who really came to his height of his career in the heavy metal genre. I mean, I guess we could consider rainbow heavy metal. So in the mid '70s, he joined Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow, which is an offshoot of Deep Purple. He was the main singer in that band for 3 or 4 years before he was replaced and moved on to Black Sabbath, which should be a name that most people recognize. And then from there spun on into a solo career, and that solo career lasted until his death in 2010. So he was in some bands before that. He was actually in a doo-wop band back in the 50s, 60s era, and then he had recorded some singles in the 70s, 60s and 70s, and was in a band called Elf, which is under most people's radar, but he was the lead singer of that band for several albums. And having been exposed and been touring with bands like Deep Purple and produced, I believe, by Roger Glover of Deep Purple, hit that band Elf. So people took a notice of his incredible, powerful vocal style, and that's what launched him, I think, into Rainbow and his further subsequent heavy metal career. So that's, in a nutshell, that's pretty much who Ronnie James Dio was. He's very iconic in the metal scene for introducing the metal hands, or if it was ever in the metal scene prior to him, he brought it to the forefront for sure. A lot of imagery and themes came from Ronnie James Dio, like talking about dragons or magical spells, or a lot of like mythological type things. He brought a lot of those to the forefront, and kind of what we're going to dive into today, he brought some ideas about maybe some worldview ideas were sort of tucked in there, things about kind of like who we are and kind of the predicament that the human race finds themselves in. He kind of touched on that as well.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, that's good. Good rundown. And I was going to say there also that to add to that, a few other things that I found out along the way. He was as far as bands that he liked, like he was a fan of classical music, right? He said that he mostly listened to Bach and Beethoven. But some of the bands in the background, I guess, that he enjoyed were the Beatles. Led Zeppelin's quite prominent, and one of my favourites, he also mentioned that he liked the Kinks, which I find quite interesting. He was a fan of the British rock. If you notice, a lot of the bands that he liked to, a lot of the bands that he was in, they had British members, and in particular, he liked British guitarists. He said that quite clearly on a couple of occasions, that he was a fan of British guitarists. And so you'll notice, like in Rainbow, you've got Richie Blackmore, and in Black Sabbath, you've got Tony Iommi, and then in Dio, you've got Viv Campbell. So, these, and many others. They're just the ones that are coming off the top of my head, that he really liked the British guitarist. And, his voice as a singer, and this is what's the standout thing about him is, I think for most people is that voice. It's the iconic hard rock / heavy metal voice for most of us, and he's a fantastic voice. But he was also a skilled lyricist, right? So he's also known for his songwriting. Of course, when he was with Rainbow for their first 3 studio albums, he wrote a lot of the material for them. When he was with Black Sabbath, he wrote a lot of their material. And then when he was with Dio, his band Dio, which he said really wasn't his solo output. He actually said that Dio, he always considered that as the band, and that the name was just sort of kind of somehow, I'll use this term, foisted upon him. It wasn't his first choice. He would have liked to have called it anything else, but Dio made sense because then they could make use of his previous history, because people would had come to know him from his time with Rainbow and Black Sabbath. But, as a writer, he did, like Brian mentioned, he wrote a lot about fantasy sort of material, but that was because he read a lot of fantasy. Like when he was growing up, he read a lot of fantasy books. You think of the stuff, medieval stuff like Knights and Dragons, and and he wrote a lot of things concerning the good and evil, the good and the bad. Like I heard him say once in an interview that without darkness there is no light. And one of the interesting things I've found out about him, Brian, and I'm going to quote this here, is that about when he wrote, where he sat down to write. He said that all the albums that I've done, I think I've been watching some kind of sporting event, so he means in front of the television, right? And only because it really relaxes me. There's no music in the background, and I love athletics anyway, and it's kind of my fantasy. I always wanted to be a great sports star, and so I'm writing about fantasy things while I'm watching my fantasy, so it all works for me. I like the idea that he said this, he said, I wrote for myself, but he writes for you, the listener. So he saw himself as someone who wrote for the downtrodden. And reading between the lines, you can see there's some things going on there. A couple of times he mentioned the fact that he's not exactly the tallest person in the world. So he knows what it's like to write for people who maybe had a hard time when they were growing up. And he used these words. Yeah, he wrote for people that were too fat or too short or too tall, all of these things. He considered himself a guy who wrote for the people. And I'm kind of paraphrasing this part here, but in investigating as well and offering a decent critique, it's not all fantasy though. If you look into it, a lot of his music is really about and from him. He is in his music. For example, on the first Dio album, so that's Holy Diver, he said that in part, Straight Through the Heart, Invisible, and Shame on the Night, they're 3 songs from that album, contained elements of what he was going through at the time, right? And so, yes, he did write fantasy, but he also wrote things that were real, that he'd lived. Now, that's not surprising to me, because I believe that all artists leave some of themselves in their work. It's part of being human. We cannot we can't do something in these sort of spheres without leaving something of ourselves in it. And I know I'm not taking the listener for the fool, you'll know that, but I'm just saying that's what I've always believed. He also said, and no surprise here, that evil is a good subject for heavy music, right? So you've got a lot of this type of music is in the minor keys. So you want to be writing about these heavy sort of topics, good and evil, knights and dragons and all these sorts of things and mythical things going on. And he said it just suits the genre. So the only thing I can add to that is he's very, very popular to this day, and I see why. I mean, I like the guy. I like watching interviews and listening to interviews with him. I think he's quite a down-to-earth person. Now, I've never met him. I never had to work with him. I imagine, like many artists, in the background there. So when I can imagine there might be some, some anxiety and something happening in the dressing room before a concert, whatever. But he comes across as a great guy and quite down-to-earth, but there's a lot more to him than that. He is a cool dude. He's very likable. Comes across very likable. Not too much hubris for a star, because let's face it, he was a star. But there's more to him than all of those things, as we're hoping to get to in this first episode of our show. So that was a mouthful, Brian. So over to you.
Well, no, I agree with your assessment there. He seemed like a very well thought out and well spoken person. He wasn't the kind of guy he wasn't like your typical wild rock star who just blurted out, obscenities or just things that he was going to regret to say later. He seemed like he was very intelligent. He had to have been well read, just based on his vocabulary, and not only his vocabulary but the themes like that you were just talking about. He seemed like he must have been very well read. You can tell an intelligent person by just by their delivery sometimes. He knew when to keep his mouth shut, because I've seen interviews where you could tell he was working around circumlocuting a particular topic or whatever in order to carefully get his idea across. So and he was again, like you said, he was a little bit of a paradox in some regards, because he was very short. Short by most standards. He was 4 foot, 5 foot, 4 foot. Wow, he was really short. 5 foot 4 inches tall, and but his voice. You hear his voice and you just think, man, this guy's a big dude, But apparently, I don't know. Apparently, he had learned how. He says that he had learned how to sing, or his vocal technique was due to his former trumpet playing and breathing, learning how to breathe, through your nose and out of your mouth while you're playing the trumpet. Kind of gave him an advantage to his singing technique. But I think some of it. I think the majority of that's just got to be natural. You can't develop the type of things that. Some of the characteristics of his voice they just come natural. But yeah, I think the man was born to sing.
Yeah, somewhat. It is somewhat like that. But I noticed that he did take care of his voice, because he said he didn't smoke cigarettes. I don't know if that meant ever, but he didn't smoke cigarettes. He didn't dabble in drugs. One of the things I saw there somewhere, Brian, he actually said, drugs are evil. And also, but he did like a beer. You look at how many interviews he's having a beer, and I think he had a few beers while he was on stage. But so he's known to like a beer.
I've never heard him cut anybody else down in an interview. Now, I may not have seen. Obviously, I haven't seen every interview with him or read every interview with him. But he has always seemed like the kind of guy who, regardless of how he really felt about somebody, he would always give somebody, he would speak positively about people. It wasn't like he was the kind of guy who, any kind of controversy or drama that may have been going on between him and the other musicians, it was never very publicized. It wasn't like he was, bad mouthing people.
No, if you dig, you can find there are some things that we're probably not going to go into here because it doesn't fit what we're doing. But if you have a bit of a dig, you will find that there were some acrimonious events in his past with other bands and things like that. But one thing I do like about him, I seen him say this more than once, was that he was when he was in a band, it was all about the band. He was like a team player, even though he was the voice, and that's what a lot of these bands focus on is your lead singer. But he always considered it to be a team thing. We're all in this together. It's us against the world. And, he's the sort of guy I would have liked to be in a band with, because that's the sort of attitude I like. If we're going to do this, we're doing it together. We're all going to find some way to agree on as much as we can, and let's just take on the whole world together, so to speak. But having said that, let's move on to a topic. Let's start digging our teeth into something here, Brian, so we can give people an idea of what we're talking about. So that's just an overview of our thoughts on Dio. There's plenty out there for you to go and dig for yourself, but let's move on to a specific topic here, Brian. Brian and I are going to talk about some specific songs. There's literally hundreds of songs you could choose from, and hundreds of quotes from Dio, but we've only got time to do what we're going to do here, so kick us off with what you've chosen there for your first point, Brian.
So just before we get to that, Garth, I wanted to insert a little bit of information about Ronnie James Dio's names. So his name is actually not, his last name anyway, is not actually Dio. So his name isn't actually Ronnie James Dio, or his last name isn't Dio. It's actually Ronald James Padavona, so an Italian fella. He apparently took on the name Dio as his last name. It's not exactly known when he started using that name, but I know it was probably somewhere between Elf and his career with Rainbow. But the name Dio in Italian means God, which is very interesting to me. And I know that sort of the way that I ever got introduced to him, or that he caught my eye, was based on the word Dio, D-I-O. So, I mean, I remember when I was in like 7th grade, and this was probably like right around the time that Holy Diver came out, and this is right around 7th grade, and I had just started 7th grade. I remember going to my music class, and one of the kids in the class had a D-I-O scrawled on his folder, and we always used to write all the names of our favorite rock bands on our folders back in school in the days. And I remember going in, and I remember saying, "Hey, that D-I-O, I seen that band. I saw a video from them, and the song was really cool. D-I-O." And then he was like, "Oh no, this is Dio. That's the guy's last name." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So just the name and the way it was written caught my eye, and was sort of the introduction to spawned or spurred my interest in Ronnie James Dio. But yeah, anyway, I just figured I'd mention his last name.
Yeah, because didn't he also say that he got it from a gangster from in the 50s somewhere? Is it 50s gangster? I didn't look into it too much, but
yeah, I believe that I remember reading something like that as well. I remember reading something like that as well. I don't really know much about who he was referring to, but
yeah,
it's just interesting that and this will probably come out a little bit more later in the interview, that he goes under the name, a name that means God, and as his last name. So, I mean, which is another paradoxical thing for a guy who seems so humble. I don't think that he was trying to get across the idea necessarily that he thought of himself as better than anyone else. But it's just a little aside for later. So, yeah. So moving on to what you originally asked of me before I digressed, is the song "Children of the Sea." So this is a Black Sabbath song off of the album Heaven and Hell, and it's a great song, obviously. But so the lyrics of this song kind of caught me as, again, he must be a very well-read person, and I think I don't know if he intentionally plays this down, because it's hard to say when somebody's playing something down intentionally. But in all the information that I have on him, and all the everything that I've heard and seen from him, he doesn't really talk too much about the inspirations of his songs unless he's asked. And then when he is asked, I feel, this is just my personal opinion, that he gives a sort of sterilized, generalized description of what he was writing these songs about, because some of these things are just unmistakably, in my opinion, pointing toward certain things, and that's what we're going to get into. But so Children of the Sea, to me, it sounds an awful lot like he's talking about human origins, and if I could be so bold to insert my opinion, is that this sounds kind of like Nephilim type thing, like you got. So the song starts off, "In the misty morning, on the edge of time, we've lost the rising sun, a final sign. As the misty morning rolls away to die, reaching for the stars, we blind the sky." So it's like, and it gets even more descriptive from there. But it talks about, so you got in the misty morning, the beginning of things, on the edge of time. Well, time would have started at the beginning of things, and he's talking about. It sounds to me like kind of like a people, or a race of people, or a group of people who, if you get further into the song, like this line, "We sailed across the air before we learned to fly." It's like, I love that type of use of paradox anyway, but in lyrics. But it sounds to me like he's talking about maybe an advanced civilization, or a civilization that had a lot more knowledge maybe than we do today. And there could be, at least, or I'm drawing allusions to the idea of maybe like Atlantis or something like that, and in some other economies or worldviews would be considered something like the Garden of Eden type thing. So that's kind of what caught me about that song. It's a great song, and I love that, because a lot of Dio's lyrics, and I'm sure Garth will agree with me, they transport the listener to these places. They're kind of, I mean, they're so descriptive and so well written that they take the mind to the place that, even though you may not, he's not explicit about where he's taking you, but there's no doubt that you land where he wants you to land, and you see the imagery that he's trying to get across. So that song in particular, to me, has always been, he's talking about a long time ago. Things were different. There was more knowledge. There was something mystical going on, something that's been lost.
So can I ask you, we talk of pre-flood here, Genesis 6 in the Bible, that sort of...
Yeah, I would say so, or, that's the Christian view, but then, from a secular or more pagan view, you've got Atlantis. It's kind of interesting, the idea of the flood in the Bible, and then you've got the non-Christian view, or possible non-Christian view, of Atlantis, which is water. The thing sinks into the water. Atlantis is submerged. Either way, you've got submerged bodies of land that at one point, or prior to their submersion, was advanced or had knowledge that we lack today. And I think that's one of the things that Dio is trying to get across. And so what we have is a song that's hearkening back to either one of those outlooks, the biblical outlook, or the non-biblical or non-Christian or pagan outlook. And I agree with him. That's what's so powerful about the song. I think that there was a point in time that they probably did sail across the air before they learned to fly, And in the song, he's talking about how they messed up somehow. In the song in particular, he's saying that it's interesting that he says, then we did the demon dance. Then we did the demon dance and rushed to nevermore, threw away the key and locked the door. So something was lost because of maybe some sort of arrogance or prideful attempt to be their own king or their own god. It's not that explicit, but yeah. So that's one of the things, one of the songs that has always really spoke to me, and the music is so awesome that it lends to this entire theme and imagery that he's trying to get across.
Let's play a bit of it now, Brian.
Yeah.
Let's have a listen a little bit.
Yeah.
reaching for the stars, we blind the sky. We sail across the air before we learn to fly.
So yeah, I mean, you can hear what I'm talking about there, and you know, it's always up to the listener to decide. But I think sometimes, and this song's a perfect example. You know, you couldn't get too many more things out of it than what I think he's trying to get across. I mean, he's obviously not talking about you know a rugby game. He's talking about. You know, you can say what you want, and you can assess it and come out with whatever you want. But I mean, it sounds to me like he's getting at an origin story and basically an idea of the fall of the human race. So Garth, you had a similar experience with the song "Holy Diver." You had wanted to bring out some of the lyrics and a few things about that.
Yeah, sure. No, look, we're going to do a few songs here, Brian. Like I said earlier, we could do hundreds. We'll probably, I don't know, we'll do a few each. But I chose Holy Diver. It's a fantastic song, a long-time favourite of mine. I love the song and really need to have a dig into, you know, what's it about, because, you know, you got this, even the title tells us something's deep going on here. It's a holy diver, so what's this about? But just lightheartedly, I'll just let you know that here in Australia, and I'm pretty sure it might have been worldwide, it was used up until last year as the tune for advertising for Hyundai Tucson's, the car.
Really?
So did that ad make it to the United States?
If it did, I didn't see it.
Oh, it's a brilliant ad. Love the ad. Anyway, and so that's as recent as last year, 2019. But let's dig into the Holy Diver a bit. It comes off Dio, the band Dio, their first album, which is called Holy Diver, and probably, you know, the best known song. You know, it was that first album, first song, bang, it's out there, it's the big one. It doesn't happen for everybody, but in my opinion, and a lot of this stuff is going to be my opinion and your opinion, and Brian and our listeners can make up their own mind. But in my opinion, it was the big one. And if you have a listen to it and you like rock music, I'm sure you'll agree. But this is released, I think, in 1983. Now, I think Ronnie had said that he'd written the song before I think he came to the band with this song or something like that. Like, it was the first song written for the Holy Diver album anyway, and for the Dio band. Now, if you have a listen to the lyrics, there's a lot of discussion around about the lyrics, about this Holy Diver. Just give me a second here. I'll just read some of the lyrics. Okay, so I just to get you an idea, I mean, we're going to play a bit of the song here in a second, but it goes, Holy Diver, you've been down too long in the midnight sea. Oh, what's becoming of me? Ride the tiger, you can see his stripes, but you know he's clean. Oh, don't you see what I mean? Got to get away, Holy Diver, yeah. I want to come back to some other lyrics in a second, but now, a lot of people say that if you listen to the lyrics and you put it all together, it's either about Satan's fall, right? The fall of Satan to earth, right? Or conversely, and this is interesting, it's about Jesus' descent into Hades, right? And there's dozens of other theories of what it's about. But I did find one spot where, one interview where Dio actually said what it's about, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes. You'll be able to go on YouTube and see this for yourself. But I'll briefly tell you what he said. He said that it's a song from a religious standpoint, so we're right there if we're talking about Satan or Jesus, right? He also mentioned about in his mind he had this idea about preaching from a perspective of fear rather than preaching from a perspective of love. He'd rather see preaching done from a perspective of love. So it's got a lot to do with his Catholic background, right? Now, he said that the song Holy Diver is really about a Christ figure who lives on another planet, not Earth, and he's done exactly the same as we've apparently experienced, or we're supposed to have experienced on Earth. dying for the sins of man so that man can start again and be cleansed and do it properly, right? He said, so the same thing happened on this other far distant planet, and all the people on this planet are calling him the holy diver because he's about to go to another world to do what he did to the first, and that is to absolve them from their sins by having himself killed. And the people are saying to him, don't go, with innuendos of tigers and stripes and hearts and being eaten. But it was meant to show just how selfish humanity is, that this one form of humanity on this one world said, no, don't go down there and save anybody else. Stay here. We need you. You belong to us. You're ours. Okay? Well, I'm taking it as face value, and I'm taking him at his word. I think that fits what the song's about, right? It's a Christ-like figure from another planet, right? And I think if you look into it, that's how I see the song. So in some ways, it is about Christ, because he wouldn't have got the idea if it wasn't for the true Christ, right? So it just wouldn't make sense if the real Christ hadn't come and given his life for mankind, right? It just wouldn't fit. It wouldn't work. But moving on from that, you know, and just in my opinion, go on.
Real quick, I was just going to say, you know, when I think you were the one who brought this to my mind, or, you know, showed this to me, because I remember when you mentioned it to me, I thought, you know, I never thought about the fact that he says you can see his stripes, but you know he's clean. Yeah. So, I mean, that's got biblical implications, you know, from Isaiah saying, you know, by his stripes we are healed. Right. And so it's like, yeah, I mean, it's interesting. And
all right. Well, anyway, so moving on from those aspects of it, if I just give my personal opinion, I mean, I like his take on it. I accept that, you know, and I enjoy his take. I think that's accurate for me. But other things that stand out to me is there's one line in the song that goes a long way, in my opinion, to helping us understand Dio's philosophy, because really that's what we want to do in this series, and we want to do in this show, is to dig into what his philosophy on life was. Okay, and there's one line in this song that to me defines it, and it's the line that says, between the velvet lies, there's a truth that's hard as steel. Now, there we have this juxtaposition of something soft and something hard, and I appreciate that. In his style, his genre, this fits perfectly. You know, you have the steel fist and the velvet glove sort of imagery here. But it's more than that, right? I don't want you to focus on that. It's just something that stands out to me. I love juxtaposition in art and music and lyrics and books and things like that. But the thing to note here is that within lies, right? Within lies, there can be truth, right? Now here we have the classic cosmic duality of good and evil. The two opposing and yet complementary principles, right? Like there's always some darkness in the good, and there's always some good in the dark character, right? Because he said, and I quote this, he said, we have to have evil in our lives to have good, and we must have good to have evil, right? So you can see this is, we'll dig more into this, but this is his philosophy, right? Now, as a Christian, I would say there are definite lines drawn between good and evil. They don't mix. For example, if you were to ask me about the character of Jesus, I would say that there's absolutely no evil found in him. But Dio tells us that that's not quite so in almost everything, that there's always an element of evil in the good and an element of good in the evil. So I think that helps me understand what his philosophy is about, and that's why I love the song, love the man. I really get to understand who he is from that line. A little bit more on the album itself is the album cover, right? Now, on this album cover, when it first came out, there was a lot of controversy about it, because it's the one where you have this demonic-looking being throwing the priest, got a chained priest, throwing him down into the sea, you know, and this being is given the devil's horns sign with his fingers, with his hands, you know. And so in some ways goes to be that, there's a lot of fantasy with a little bit of reality in this album cover. Now, concerning this monster drowning the priest, Dio himself said, how do you know that it's not a priest drowning a monster?
Right.
He said, and now it's controversial, he said he wanted it to be controversial, right? And he said that controversy sells. True. All true, right? All true. All of the above is great. And he also mentioned something like, it's a business at the end of the day. So, he's there to make a bit of controversy to get the attention. So he's not shying away from this thing, right? He's not saying, oh, no, look, it's just art and blah, blah, blah. He's saying, hey, yeah, this is controversy. This is something that's happening here. Maybe in this day and age, how do you know that that's not a priest drowning a monster, right? And he also said that this cover, you've got to go and have a look at the cover. Go onto the internet and look up Dio album.
Holy Diver, yeah. You just put
Holy
that
Diver.
in. Probably the only thing that popped up.
You'll come up with it, yeah. And he said that the other thing that why he did this is he said that to make you think about what you're looking at, not to judge a book by its cover, right? Don't judge people by what you see. Judge the person by their heart and their soul. Now, what's wrong with that? That's where we should all be at. So, to a certain extent, I agree with him about this. We don't judge books by their covers. However, I just want to say to you, in my opinion, if there's something that's quite overt, let's use an obvious example like a pornographic magazine. When you see the cover of that magazine, you'll have an idea of what's going on inside, right? Or let's just say you and I start a band and we'll call ourselves Rotten Mouldy Flesh, right? Right. Well, then I think people are going to be entitled to make some assumptions of what might be in the cover of that inside the cover of that magazine, or what you and I might be on about if we said, let's go with Rotten Mouldy Flesh, okay? So I'm just saying this is part of what I'm trying to say. Let's look at things critically. So I do agree not to judge a book by its cover. But if that cover is overt, then I think you can probably, it's okay for you to say and assume you could make some, assumptions, I'll use that word, assumptions about what's going on inside.
Right, yeah. And just to elaborate a little bit on the idea of, I think, again, what he was getting at, on one, and see, this is the thing, this is the brilliance of it, really, is that the multifacetedness of being able to draw these different things out of it, because, and this also goes to, and it sort of speaks to the idea of the worldview behind it, but it also speaks to the problem with the worldview behind it, which you've been kind of mining out of this already. But so his dislike for the Roman Catholicism, because that's what he grew up in, and it's like, I can see what he means by, what we know of a lot of controversies and conspiracies within the Roman Catholic Church. A priest who would be guilty of something, like those controversies and conspiracies, would be considered evil. So, if you're drowning him, and I do remember him saying, how do you know it's not a priest drowning a demon? And it's like he actually said, how do we know what God looks like? Which is a curious thing to say also, because there's some theological, there would be some theological pushback on that. It's like, so he's basically saying, the evil guy is the guy who's guilty of all these things that the Roman Catholic Church is guilty of, and him having grown up in that system and experienced the negative side of it, and not the side that it purports to be or proposes to be, like, a Christian organization. He grew up with experiencing the negative aspects of that religion, which would really just be the human the human element in it that's causing the evil, not the Christian side. But anyway, so yeah, I see what he's saying, I see what he's getting at, and like you, I agree with that part of it. But then this Eastern philosophy that's starting to take shape, which I believe ultimately is his philosophy, it suffers from the thing that he talks about in the song, between the velvet lies, there's a truth that's hard as steel. He's not giving us full truth. He's giving us both sides. He's giving us the plus and the negative. And even though that's the way things play out here in our time space on Earth, ultimately, like you had said, I disagree, because not everything that you don't need to have evil to have good. I don't think. I think that's a false judgment, a false assessment. I think you can have good without evil. But in our human realm, in our time space, in our fallen human existence, that is true.
Come back to some more songs in a bit here, Brian, but take us through about Dio's logo. Tell us what that's about.
Okay, yeah. So, again, it was one of the things that caught my eye early on, not knowing who he was prior to that. The logo itself has, apparently, I mean, and I've seen it. I saw kind of one of those things where somebody shows it to you, you can't unsee it. But if you turn the logo, the word devil is in there. And so you've got God, Dio, the word in Italian for God. And if you look at the logo, you can see some of the, it's hard to describe without just showing somebody, but you can see with the way that it's drawn that you can make out the letters D-E-V-I-L because of the what do you call it, the serifs or whatever that are on the letters.
So is that if you turn it upside down?
Yeah, Garth, it is. If you turn it upside down, you can see that it looks like the word devil, which again is that juxtaposition. Now, I would say that it's intentional, just based on the fact that we can see it, because I don't think there are too many things in this world that are that coincidental, where it just happens to be you've got the word for God and then the word for devil. If you turn it upside down, you know, that's a key component to what's going on here. But so Dio, in an interview that I heard of him talking about that logo, he had said that he had no idea about that, and he actually said what he said was, "I'm not going to take the blame for that," which was interesting. You know, trying to absolve himself of any kind of because I think in that particular setting he was actually talking about Judas Priest as well, and the controversy that they went through with some of their lyrics and that where they had been in trouble. So he might have been speaking from a space of being defensive because someone may have been, you know, attacking him and trying to say, you know, he's responsible for, you know, corruption of youth or something. But anyway, he was saying that, you know, he didn't know anything about it and it wasn't his idea. That was probably more of the thrust of his comments, was it wasn't his idea. But he actually said, "I'm not smart enough to come up with an idea like that," which I totally disagree with. I think he's smart enough to come up with something like that. The man is a master marketer, and I'm not saying that he did come up with it, but I wouldn't be surprised because if you listen, that's one of the things about his speech, and he's careful. And I'm not trying to malign him. I'm just saying it's possible, based on what he said, that someone showed him the idea, and that he thought it was a marketable idea, because he said it wasn't his idea, and that he's not taking responsibility for it. Doesn't mean that he didn't know about it. But and again, like I said, I don't want to call the man a liar, but when I see things like this, like the whole backward masking thing, and I would love to do an episode on that at some point, backward messages in music, like certain things, I just think they wouldn't be found or noticeable unless somebody pointed them out. And a lot of times I think that's the person who came up with the idea says, "Hey, look at this," and then the word just leaks out into the community, people start talking about it, because I don't know a lot of these things would ever be found. And Dio even said, he's like, people can look at things and see what they want in them, and that is totally true. But it seems a stretch to me personally that we would find the word devil when you turn the word God upside down. I think there's an intentional mind behind this, whether it was his or somebody else's. What are your thoughts on that, Garth?
I actually believe in coincidences, right? They do happen. But sometimes there's just too much going on for it to be coincidence. And I think if Dio means God, and then if it's inverted or turned upside down, and then that's the devil, that's the opposite. Then we're talking about this thing where I just finished talking about that dualism, that's going on there, where within the one piece of artwork you've got both God and the devil. I'm not saying it's so, but I just wouldn't be surprised either.
Right. Yeah.
I think it's as far as marketing goes, and it's absolutely brilliant. But it also, if it's true, if we're right, and this is just our opinion, but if we're right, then it just strengthens even further what I'm trying to say, what his philosophy on life was.
Exactly. Yeah. And again,
it's further evidence.
Right, exactly, and I'm not trying to malign the man because it's a brilliant marketing technique. It gets people talking. So now, Garth, what about the mascot? What's his name?
Okay, so we got we mentioned him earlier, the mascot, the demonic-looking character on. I think he appears on 3 albums. He definitely appears on the first album, Holy Diver. He appears on Next in Line, and then he's on, is it the live album, something like that. But anyway,
well, he's on Dream Evil too.
Evil, yeah, that's it. Yeah. Okay, so yes, so his name is Murray, right? Okay, so that's his name. The mascot's name, it's great. I love it. It's this big demonic-looking creature, and he gets the name Murray. I mean, the poor guy.
Yeah.
You'd think it'd be something, a bit more heavier than that, but okay, we'll go with Murray. But actually, that's not his real name, because that's the name that Dio misheard. See, because Murray has been around for trillions of years, right? So, trillions of years ago, there were 2 races of beings on this planet, and they were competing for ownership of the planet. Let's just put it that way. I'm going to give you my brief version of the demon mascot Murray, and you can go and look online for the full version. But this is just going to be my take on it, the bit that I know. But anyway, there was these two competing races of super beings back in before time. And they were intent on wiping each other out. And one of them had prophesied, the leaders of one of these groups had prophesied to the other leader that one of his offspring would rise up and kill him and take over. So Murray's mother, so the leader of this race, he actually started killing all his offspring, right? So his mother, learning that this was happening, took Murray and hid him in a cave, and she gave him a potion that put him to sleep for trillions of years. And one day, Ronnie James Dio found this cave, and he went in there and he found this super being, and his real name is Muralcy, right? Muralcy. But because Dio couldn't understand him, and because he'd been asleep for so long, it was very hard for him to understand his language, and he thought he said his name was Murray, right? So over the course of time, Dio would visit this cave, and he would give Murray information about what's going on in the world today, but Murray would give him information about what happened in times past. And so Dio would take that information and go home and write songs about it, write songs about the information that had been given to him by this super being Muralcy, who he thought his name was Murray. So that's, you can look this up for yourself. That information is within the Dream Evil tour book. That you can find that online. But anyway, but what's your take? Like in the Christian worldview, this being would be seen as being a demon of some sort. What do you think, Brian?
Yeah, I agree. Well, first of all, my mind is reeling from that description. I've never heard any of that regarding this demon. So I'm really I need to unpack that. But yeah, that's very interesting, because if that's from his own, well, I'll just say if that's from Ronnie James Dio's own imagination, that's pretty impressive. But
I just will say I think it was written by somebody else.
Okay. Well, either way, it's interesting how these figures get their names and any kind of backstory, really. But that assessment, or that
yeah, look, I think, Brian, that was written by somebody else, but it kind of fits, doesn't it? It fits in with what we're saying here, to a certain extent.
Yes, yeah, it does. And, so I guess to answer your question, look by the outward appearance of the character Murray, it would definitely be something that would be akin to like a monster or whatever. But I don't know that we necessarily would judge the outward appearance of this character, and assume he was evil. He does have the popular characteristics of something that looks like a monster. But I do want to share this one little thing that I thought was interesting. And I was unable to find the original source for this, but I have seen other images or drawings of demonic beings, and I'm not saying that I'm not saying that he lifted it or stole the idea from something, but there are other images of demonic beings that look similar to Mr. Murray. But I do remember hearing a testimony one time about someone who was having encounters, like night encounters or night terrors, or what they might have even been calling like alien encounters, which we could talk a different time about their relation to the demonic, but the whole alien thing. But the person's description, I don't know that they were a fan of Ronnie James Dio. That never came up in the interview, but they gave a description of a being, and it sounded exactly like what this Murray guy looks like, which I just thought was interesting, because I'm like, where have I seen that before? On the album cover of a Ronnie James Dio album, and it's also like interesting too that it has the characteristics of some other demonic beings that have been drawn or whatever, So anyway, yeah, I can't say that the character himself. I mean, the name is again paradoxical. Murray sounds so non-threatening, right? I mean, how much more like milquetoast can you get? Nothing against people who are named Murray, so maybe I shouldn't say. Oh, no. Yeah. But I'm just saying, like, the word Murray has no hard consonants in it or anything. It's not, like it's just so smooth that it's kind of like, the same thing that I laugh about with like Iron Maiden's Eddie, like Eddie. Yeah. It just sounds like Eddie Haskell from Leave It to Beaver, or the kid down the street, Eddie, but. So it's interesting. It's an interesting juxtaposition again to have this foreboding-looking figure whose name is Murray. But
all right, so we'll leave Murray there for now, Brian, and we'll move on to a topic I'm interested in hearing you talk about. Is another Dio tune, and quite a well-known one as well. If you're a Dio fan or you know anything about him, "Last in Line."
Yeah, so this was Dio's second solo album, and it was just as powerful, I think, as the first. But the title track, "The Last in Line," had a video, which I thought was a very interesting video as well, for a lot of reasons, and maybe we could get into it later, because there's a lot to unpack, honestly, in that video alone. But in the song, the main line, the pre-chorus is, "We'll know for the first time if we're evil or divine, we're the last in line." So there's a couple of things going on in just that sentence alone. So you got the idea of questioning. It almost seems like he's given us the option in, we'll know for the first time if we're evil or divine. He's given us the option of it's one or the other, which is interesting because there's other spots when Dio alludes to the idea that we're both, but he's not giving us the option. He's given us a black and white scenario here. You know, we're either evil or divine. But then the idea that we're the last in line is interesting to me too, because again, I don't know. I'm not speaking for Dio, but what I get out of that is that generationally, or you could do it across a couple of different distinctions, but like he could be meaning that we're the last in line, like last generation before there's Christ returns, or in the pagan economy it could be before the gods return. We're the last in line before the externalization of the hierarchy, like Alice Bailey type stuff. So I think it's interesting, and this again speaks to the idea, I think, that Dio, to try to say it kind of tongue-in-cheek, like Dio knows a little more than he's letting on. He's well-read. The man understands these concepts better than a lot of the people who are in like satanic bands or whatever. You know, this guy, it's not like he's not just throwing this stuff out there to be shocking. He's well read. He understands these concepts, and what he's read would be of interest to me. But I don't know if you have anything later on for talk about, like, speak to like what kind of things he read, but other than like mythological kind of things. But the last in line, it sounds to me like he's saying we're on the cusp of finding out who we are, which is of supreme interest, or should be of supreme interest to any human being who's given any thought to the idea. Like one of the things in philosophy is, and for any worldview to be worthy of consideration, it's got to answer 5 questions, and one of those questions is, who am I? So for any worldview that's worth considering, say the worldview of it would encompass a lot of different worldviews, but like say the worldview of atheism. Who am I? Well, you're just an evolved organism, that came from, I don't know exactly how, but you know what I'm saying. Like, you're just basically, you're a human that evolved from a monkey, that evolved from a whatever. But what he's saying, we're the last in line. We're going to find out who we really are, is what it sounds like to me. So in the other lyrics in the song are, we're all born upon the cross. And it says, we're the throw before the toss, which is another juxtaposition, which I love. But you can release yourself, but the only way to go is down. And so there's a couple of things that could be mined out of that. We're all born upon the cross. Well, is he saying that, we're born into a world where this is the option, for salvation? Or is he saying we're all born upon the cross as we're born at a deficit, we're born with infirmities, which I think both of those things are true. He may have been coming at it more from the perspective of, we're all born upon the cross, like this is the world we're born into, and the only option that we're given is, or what we're told is, you have to accept the cross, otherwise look out, you're going down, like. He may have been coming at it from a cynical point of view. I don't know, but it's like, later on in the song he says, 2 eyes from the east, it's the angel or the beast, which I always thought he said 2 will rise from the east. But again, we still have that. The east thing, well, we're east of Eden, So it's like east is where we're, kind of, and typically or characteristically, like we look to the east for. That's always the good side, like it's the angel or the beast. So again, we've got like, are we going to find out that Satan was really the true God? I mean, that seems a little ridiculous, but I'm just saying he's drawing that comparison between, it's the angel or the beast. And here's the big thing in the song, I think. And the answer lies between the good and bad. So
there you go.
So that's interesting. The answer lies between the good and bad. So right there, I've got to put the brakes on and go, wait a minute. So you don't think that you're going to find the answer in the good. It's going to be, the answer is going to be, I mean, from an overall perspective, I'm going to say, I want the answer that's good. I don't want it mixed with any kind of bad. I want pure, unadulterated good, But I think maybe what he's trying to get at is what we've been told is good. And a lot of this comes out later on. We'll probably talk about it in the lyrics of Heaven and Hell. We might get to that. I don't know. But what we're told is good may not be the full story, and that some of the things that we've been told are evil are actually not evil. I think that may be more what he's going for. And just based on what I've heard him say, I think that would be the way he would probably describe that. I mean, it's a great song. There's a lot of imagery going on in there. And again, we're only just trying to unpack some of these things that Dio himself only really knows. So I think we're off to a good start on this topic of Dio and the music and lyrics of Dio, but there's just so much to get into here that I think we're probably just going to have to bring this back on our next episode and make this a two-parter. So we're hoping that you'll stay with us, listener, that we hope that what you've heard so far you're enjoying. I know personally I'm having a great time discussing this. So our second episode will be the conclusion of this particular topic of Ronnie James Dio, and we hope that you will join us for that as well. And Garth, anything before we sign off?
Well, I was going to say, yeah, look, it's good fun. I've enjoyed doing this with you. And to be honest, if you look down our list there, we've only really just got started. I mean, there's so much more to dig through. So we'll at least there'll be at least another part to this, and probably about the same length, and a whole lot more to talk about as well when we come back and do that. So until next time, it's good night from me, and it's good night from him. I don't know why I said that, Brian. Sorry. That's a line out of that's a bit of British humour for you.
Well, you can feel free to use it. I just didn't catch it. So,
you ever heard of the two Ronnies, Ronnie Barker and?
I've heard it. I've heard it, but I've never seen it.
That's how they signed off. They always signed off. Well, it's good night from me, and it's good night from him, so that the other guy doesn't get a chance to say good night. And I just pulled it on you. I can't believe I did it.
kind of like the Burns and Allen, George Burns and Gracie Allen. He would always say, "Say good night, Gracie," and to his wife, and she would say, "Good night, Gracie."
Okay, so we haven't recorded part 2 of the Dio analysis as yet, because we ran out of time here. But there's plenty more to come. Some topics we hope to get to include an analysis of more songs, like The Gates of Babylon. Now, during the recording of that session, Demon harassed the band, so that's a very interesting topic to discuss. Other songs we would like to get to are The Sign of the Southern Cross, very close to my heart since I was born and bred beneath that asterism. We also hope to get to a couple of Christian-themed songs Dio sang, which, in my humble opinion, have just the sweetest lyrics of any song that he sang in his career. Besides that, we'll cover more of Dio's philosophy on life and much, much more. So go to our website, philosopherrock.com. So it's all one word, philosopherrock.com, and join our mailing list. And at our website, you can contact us. You can contact us through the website with your comments and suggestions, or you can email us at philosopherrock@gmail.com. That's PHILOSOPHERR, so it's double R in there, OCK, philosopherrock@gmail.com. Again, our email is philosopherrock@gmail.com. Now, finally, if you like us and you like what we're doing here, please help us by spreading the word. If this series is to continue, we need your help. So please share this show anywhere you think appropriate, but please, at the very least, share it on all your social media lists. That's the best you can do for us. Thank you. Okay, so that'll do it for now. This has been Philosopher Rock. I'm your host, GK, and on behalf of my co-host, Brian, I'd like to say until next time, God bless and hooroo.
song in the midnight sea. Oh, what's becoming of me? Ride the tiger, you can see his stripes, but you know he's clean.